So basically every town had like dozens of illustrators. They did the advertising, the magazine illustrations, the newspaper, and the big publishing centers like New York would have thousands of people whose job it was every day to draw. And that made it really easy when you published a novel to find an illustrator, because you had a huge industry supporting you and supporting that craft. But of course what happened was, starting about 100 years ago, that industry started to disappear and crash. And why was that? Exactly. This is an early camera in the Sears and Roebuck. It's such an early camera, they didn't have another camera to take a picture of it with. So they had to draw it. And you want to go back to the illustrator, go back in time and say, don't draw the camera, dude. Because once everyone gets cameras, then the newspapers fire all their artists. Sears and Roebuck in 1908 starts taking pictures of its products. And basically, the illustration industry completely crashes and disappears. And as a result, it makes it harder for novelists to find people to draw stuff. And illustrations start to fall out of adult books, and then they fall out of teen books, and then they fall out of middle grade books, until finally now, everything older than like the Spiderwick Chronicles probably won't have pictures in it. So remember when you were 8 years old, and the first time someone handed you a book with no pictures, and you were like, well, this sucks. Why are there no pictures? And they said something to you like, oh, that's so you can use your imagination. Well, they were lying. People did not get imaginations in 1910. They got cameras in 1910. It was a technological shift, and that is why we lost our illustrations out of novels. And that's why our culture, but not Japan, because for whatever reason they're cooler than we are, decided to get rid of all of our illustrated books. So I was writing Leviathan and reading about this stuff, and I was about 60 pages into Leviathan, and I said, well, now I have to stop and rethink this. What I have to do is make this book like a book in 1914 and make it like going back in time. So I need to go find an illustrator. And I found this amazing guy who, those of you who read the book know, his name is Keith Thompson, and he is a wonderful illustrator. And the first thing he did for me was this awesome map. Now, 100 years ago, most people were illiterate. And because of that, maps weren't drawn just with text, but they used lots of pictures. So the map sort of taught you things about the world. And as you can see in this map, Russia is like a giant bear eating Austria-Hungary, and Austria-Hungary's sticking knives into Serbia. Germany's a big gun shooting at Russia. France is clawing at the back of Germany. So what does that tell you about the world if you are illiterate? It's a big war. Exactly. It is, in fact, World War I. Now, I'm sure some of you have read the book, so you know why World War I started, right? Because of the assassination of a Scottish rock band called Franz Ferdinand. No, it was Archduke Franz Ferdinand. He was the Archduke of Austria-Hungary, and I'll tell you very quickly how this worked. He and his wife were killed by these Serbian school kids, like 17-year-old boys. And over the next 6 weeks, basically this is what happened. Austria said, we're going to beat you up because you killed our duke. Russia said, but we like the Serbs. If you beat them up, we must beat you up. But Germany said, but we like the Austrians. If you beat them up, we must attack you. The French said, but the Russians speak French when they're being fancy, so we'll have to defend them. And the British said, well, we might as well get into this because otherwise we'll have to deal with Ireland. So over 6 weeks, you went from 2 people getting killed to hundreds of millions of people going to war. Like, 3 months after the assassinations, Japan was attacking a German base in China. It was all around the world, crazy stuff going on. All these countries got wiped off the map. What else happened? So many things happened. Basically it changed the entire world. And I always thought that was such a weird thing to have transpired just because 2 people got killed. So I said to myself, I must make it weirder. And one thing that would make it weirder is if those 2 people were your parents. Because my mom actually died like 7 years ago. And there's something that happens when you lose a parent It's like the world is broken. You know, like there's something you always were going to depend on, and it's suddenly gone, and it takes, you know, the world is broken, and it takes a while for it to fix itself. But when the kids of Archduke Ferdinand and Sophie, when their parents died, the world really did break. You know, you had hundreds of millions of people going to war, 10 million people dying in battle, and so every day, for the next 5 years, every time they opened up their newspapers, every story was about these terrible battles, countries getting wiped off the map, and it's all because of their personal family tragedy. So I said, well, that would be a really cool way to tell the story of the war. And I found out that Franz and Sophie did have kids. They had 3 kids, and one was named Max, but I got rid of 2 of the kids and replaced them all with Alec, a 15-year-old boy, and of course he feels personally responsible for World War I. Now, after his, the story starts, of course, the night that his parents are killed, and his servants come to whisk him away to make sure the same thing doesn't happen to him. And they take him away in a giant walking tank. Because, of course, I had to make things even weirder. So I said to myself, I'm going to change technology. Instead of machines with wheels and treads, wouldn't it be cool if we had machines with legs? With giant, awesome legs. And and now that probably looks weird to you, right? Because we think of legs as being inefficient and clanky, and even though we have them ourselves. Because after all, what's faster, a car or a horse? A car, okay. Well, what if you're in like a really dense forest and the trees are close together? What's faster, a car or a horse? A horse. Okay, what if you're like in really steep ravines going up and down? What's faster, car or a horse? Yeah, maybe car, maybe horse. Okay, where is a car always faster than a horse? A highway, exactly. In 1914, there were no highways. There were dirt roads, there were some cobblestone streets, but we made a choice, a technological choice. Instead of putting cool, awesome legs on our machines, we paved the crap out of the entire world. Like, think about it, the parking lot out there, you could like roll a soccer ball from here, you know, across level pavement without ever going across grass, you know, onto the street, onto the highway, to my house, you know, to Sarah Palin's house in Alaska. You could go to Mexico. You could go anywhere without leaving that pavement. We paved the world so we didn't have to do this. But what if we'd taken a different angle? What if we'd gone in a different direction? And I, you know, found, I wasn't quite convinced at first. But about 4 or 5 chapters in, I was working with Keith really closely, bouncing back and forth, and he caught up to me. He'd done as many chapters, he'd illustrated as many chapters as I had written. So he said, you know, I have no chapters. I must write, I must draw. What shall I draw? And I said, okay, well, something's going to chase Alec in about 3 chapters, so draw something that looks kind of fast, and then I'll write it in. This is awesome. I'm like outsourcing my, you know, my creative responsibilities to Canada. And so he came back with this. And when I first saw it, I was like, you know, Keith, I don't believe in that 100%. You know, it's this sort of 4-legged walking machine. It looks like a cross between a horse and a motorcycle. It's so weird and gawky looking. I don't entirely believe that anyone would design that. And he said, oh, really? Meet il dobino, which is Italian for totally stupid, I think. It's a 4-legged walking machine for walking around in rough terrain in the vineyards so you don't have to, you know, build roads around your grapes. And it's a real thing. People really try, I mean, but that kid does not look happy, right? Like, maybe it's because of the fez. But it looks like an ungainly thing. But, you know, people were trying this. And wouldn't the world be, like, weirder and cooler if they had succeeded? Now, when Keith actually first sends me drawings, he doesn't send a finished product like that over there. He sends a sketch like this. And this is one of the sketches he sent me that really didn't work. It's the scene where the Stormwalker, which is that 2-legged tank that's carrying Alec away, there's one scene where it's dragging a big piece of cargo across the ice. And I said, we need to draw this because this important thing is going to happen soon, so we need to show how they're connected. He sent me this. And I said, Keith, it doesn't show it right. Could you do it from a different angle? He said, what angle? I said, the side. He said, the side of what? I said, the side of both of them. He said, I don't know what you mean. I said, I hate you. And we started to get into a fight, but then I realized I can't fight with Keith because he's like Canadian. So what I did instead was, this is what I do when I'm feeling really passive-aggressive with people. I build them a diorama. There is no laughter at my dioramas, thank you. This is perfectly cromulent diorama. It's got that's the Stormwalker, because of course I had a toy walker, and the chains and the thing, and it's awesome. But what it brought home to me after he sent me the illustration is, of course, just as sometimes a horse is better than a car, sometimes a drawing is better than a photograph. And this is so awesome. I love all the little details in here. You have, one second. You have Hoffman over here with the fuel, and Master Klopp doing the welding, Volger sticking his head out. You have the two principals, of course, Alec and Darren, Dr. Barlow poking your head out, and even doing a sort of Grinch Who Stole Christmas move up here. It's not a dog, it's a Tasmanian tiger, because I am half Australian and therefore, for tax reasons, have to put Australian stuff in all my books. But like I said, this really showed me that, that an illustration could be so much better. If you're a newspaper, if you're a catalog company, then yes, photography is what you want. You just want that objective reality. But if you're a novelist, you want something like this, because otherwise your book will start looking like this. And no one will believe these wonderful things that are in your imagination because you won't be able to convey them. Now, the other character in the book is, of course, Darren Sharp, who goes by the name Dylan because she's one of my favorite kinds of characters. She's a girl pretending to be a boy so that she can do something cool in the olden days. Now, the problem with the olden days, they had fancy stuff, they had awesome clothes, as we can see, they had airships, but the problem with the olden days is they were bad in many ways. Lots of racism, lots of slavery, lots of sexism, and women couldn't do very much in 1914. They couldn't join the army. They couldn't vote. In a lot of places, they couldn't own property. In Kansas, they had only recently won the right to wear pants. In 1910 is when it became legal for women to wear pants on their own property in Kansas. So a lot of women did, in history, actually dress up. They dressed up like men. There was a pirate captain. There was a blues musician. There were several people in various wars. There was one interesting case in the Revolutionary War. 19-year-old girl. She was, her parents started to say to her, you need to get married. You're 19. You're so old. Old. 19, get married. But she looked around, and she was like, all the men my age have gone off to war. So there's only like 50-year-old dudes left. But her parents was like, no, you have to get married. So instead, she snuck out one night, put on pants and a tunic, and joined the Revolutionary Army. And actually served for 4 years. And I also liked, and it got decorated, and you can read about it in a book called A Soldier's Secret, which is a novelization of it. And I always like characters that have a secret. It's cool because then there's always some tension between them and everyone around them. Like when Tally knows that she was sent there to betray the smoke, but no one else does. That keeps her always an edge, and it makes everything everyone says to her, it colors it in a different light. So, the reason why Darren wants to be dressed up like a boy is, of course, so she can fly, because she wants to fly more than anything else. So she joins the British Air Service. And the first thing they do with their recruits is they send them 1,000 feet into the air to make sure that they have a good head for heights. And of course, they send them up in a giant hydrogen-breathing jellyfish. Now, why is it a jellyfish? Well, there's an interesting story. Charles Darwin, in my world, discovered DNA and started making these creatures. And the British Empire is built on the backs of his fabricated creatures. So in my world, Origins of Species was a cookbook, basically. It was how to do it. But he had a friend called Huxley who did all of his arguing for him. He was known as Darwin's bulldog. And Huxley's day job was he was a jellyfish scientist. But they were classier back then, and they called them medusae.